Gather up some herbs, craft some medicine, and get back out there in the wasteland, because today we have another Dayar video. Medicines are a very important part of surviving in the wastelands of Dayar. So in today's video, I'll rank each medicine in a tiered list based on two factors: the usefulness of the medicine and also the complexity to craft it. Now remember to subscribe to the channel if you're new so you can get any new content, and make sure to leave a comment down below on what you think the best medicines are. With all that being said, let's get into it. So here's the tiered list that we're going to be working with and all the items that we're going to look at today. The first group of items deal with energy, and we're going to look at those, and then that's going to be followed by items that reduce radiation. And then the third group of medicines that we're going to look at are just miscellaneous medicines. So let's get into it and start off with Medicaid. Now, Medicaid is an energy medicine that's a little complex to make. It requires things like coffee, sugar, lymph, radiation mushrooms, and some other items as well. But the effect that you get from it is psychostimulation, which gives you +5 energy every hour. And if you have the lasting effect perk like I do, it can last up to 2 days. Now, getting 5 energy every hour is huge, especially for looting, and I think it's pretty useful. It's very complex to make, but it's very useful. So just because of its complexity, I'm gonna rank it as a B tier. I'd say it's S tier for usefulness, but less than B tier for complexity. Next up is jam. So this is a little complex to make because you need sugar, and I'll be saying this multiple times throughout this video, but sugar can be pretty hard to get in bulk quantities. But in terms of jam, it gives you +50 energy, some hunger, and thirst as well. It's pretty good, but in terms of bulk crafting and use, I'd put it as a D tier, just because it's a little complex to make a lot of, and it's also pretty heavy too, so in the early game it's not really practical. Next up is Energizing Potions. So these are actually really good because it gives you 100 energy every time you use them, and it's pretty easy to make as well. There's it just requires amanita and daily nightshade, some water, and alcohol, and it also gives 75 experience every time you make them, and you can make them starting at level 34. So this has the potential to give you a lot of experience, and not only that, but you can use it a lot too, especially looting. If you don't want to go back and forth to get items, you just pop one of these, and they're pretty easy to make too. If you need help finding the best way to get herbs, then I made a video on that. But yeah, so I'd put this as S tier actually, just because it's so easy to make and it's very useful. Next up is Lydiacide. Lydiacide gives you 150 energy every time, but it's much more complex to make than an energizing potion. So because of that complexity, it requires poison, sugar, radiation mushrooms, and also strawberries, which you can herb for, but you might want a greenhouse for those. So because of the complexity, I'd put this as C tier. Now, honorable mention here, it's not in the crafting menu, but coffee is also very good. So whenever you loot, make sure to pick up the coffee, because I believe cold coffee gives you +55 energy. So that's always good to have, and I think it's pretty light too. So moving on to the radiation reduction medicines. So first up are Detoxifying Potions. These are pretty simple to make, and it reduces your radiation by 25 points. All you need are dandelions and chanterelles and some water, alcohol, and your radiation reduces by 25 points. I think that there could be other radiation reduction medicines that might be a little better, but this is still pretty solid. I'd say A tier. I'll put it at A tier just because it's pretty easy to make. Next up is Dandelion Tea. Dandelion Tea reduces your radiation by 10 points, also helps a little with thirst. It does require sugar and dandelions and water, which isn't too bad to make, but again, sugar is pretty hard to get in bulk quantities. So I'll put this as maybe C tier just because there's other options too. So next up is Coresistamine. This is an endgame item. It's pretty complex to make, So in terms of complexity, it's low on the ranking. But in terms of effects, so this reduces the radiation that you receive from the environment by 3 points every hour, I believe. And it lasts a little over a day if you have the lasting effect perk. This is pretty useful if you're in cities that have a lot of radiation. So just because of its complexity, I'd put it as a B tier. But in terms of usefulness, it's between S and A tier. So it's pretty useful if you have it. It's good for those situations. You can also make water in the water purifier with it. So it is pretty useful, but just, it's pretty complex to make. Next up are Pickled Vegetables. So this reduces radiation by 15 points and increases health by 5, hunger by 75, and thirst by 50. So it's good all around. It's another heavy item if you have a lot of these. And it is a little complex to make in bulk. It requires some vegetables, salt, and sugar, which can be hard to make. So I'd say C tier, just because there's better items that you can reduce radiation with. Next up is IR 190. So with this, it reduces radiation by 30 points, which is pretty good, but it's also pretty complex to make. You need cranberries, sugar, lymph, and poison, among some other materials. So it's pretty complex to make. The radiation reduction is pretty good, so I'll put it as B tier. Now, next up we have Moonshine, Whiskey, Wine, and Apple Cordial. Now, with these items, the Moonshine and Whiskey, in terms of complexity, are pretty easy to make compared to the Wine and Apple Cordial. That's because Wine and Apple Cordial requires a lot of sugar, and again, sugar is very hard to get in large quantities, so you won't be making too many of those. But in terms of Moonshine, it requires activated charcoal, potatoes, and water, and the only difference with whiskey is it requires corn. And with Moonshine, radiation reduces by 25 points, which is pretty good, but it also reduces your health by 5 points, which isn't ideal, and there's a chance for blindness, which, just makes sense. So for Moonshine, I'll put as D tier, just because it's not going to be your first option. Now, when it comes to whiskey, whiskey does require corn, so you're going to need to set up like a greenhouse or something if you want to make these in bulk quantities. But for whiskey, radiation reduction is 30 points, and also gives you a little energy, 10 points of energy, which I don't really understand, but I didn't make the game. So it's a little better than Moonshine. It's not too complex to make, so I'll put it as B tier. Next up is Wine, and homemade wine. This is all unaged, by the way. If you age whiskey or wine, then the radiation reduction increases, but you just need to wait an extended period of time, which not everybody does. So for homemade wine, base level wine, it reduces radiation by 50 points, which is very good. So in terms of usefulness, it's up there. But in terms of complexity, it again requires sugar. So I'd say usefulness, it's an A tier. Complexity might be like C tier, so I'll put it in the middle and make it B tier. And last up for the radiation reduction meds is Apple Cordial. It reduces radiation by 30 points, and it also reduces health by 5 points as well. I'm going to put it with Moonshine because it's not going to be your first option. It actually requires a lot of sugar, or a decent amount of sugar too, so I'm actually going to move it to E tier. Next up, we have the miscellaneous meds. So first is antibiotics. It's a little complex to make. You need lymph, some sulfur, sugar, and moss along with water. So it's a little complex to make, and you won't use it that often. Mainly for if you're curing diseases and that kind of thing. So I'm going to actually put this as E tier. Yeah, I'm going to move it to F tier just because you don't use it that often. Next up is the healing salve. So this is moderately complex to make. You need white man's foot, moss, and lymph and fat to make this, and it increases health by 25 points. So it's good. You can also heal your pets with it. So I'm going to put it as E tier just because you won't be using it that often. And with activated charcoal, which is next, it has no use by itself. It's used to craft many other things, but in terms of immediate medical need, you won't be using it too much, so I'm going to put it as F tier. Next up is Bryocar. This increases health by 150 points, which is pretty good, but it's also one of the more complex items to make. It needs toothgrass, it needs fat, lymph, honey, along with water and alcohol. So it's pretty complex to make. It does get your health way up there. So it is useful, but I don't think it's the most useful item, so I'll put it as D tier. Next up are Painkillers. So Painkillers are a little complex to make, need sugar, poison, and cranberries among some other items. And the effect that you get is it reduces the negative effect caused by any injuries you have. So if you leave a battle with many injuries, you might want to pop painkiller just to reduce the negative effects that you get from that. Again, you won't be using this too often. I'm going to put it as E tier. And the same will probably go for Bandages. Bandages increase health by 10 points, and you also need these to heal your pets, I believe. So, you don't use it that often. They're very easy to make. So I'm going to put that as E tier. And finally, saved the best for last, is Aqua. Now, Aqua is probably arguably one of the more difficult items to craft in the game. It requires a bunch of different medicines that we've already mentioned, and that's just to make one barrel of this. So basically, what Aqua does is it immediately increases your health, hunger, thirst, and energy by 100 points, and also gives you outstanding health effect. And this effect is the best effect that you can get in the game. It increases health by 1 point, hunger by 1 point, thirst by 2, and energy by 2 points every hour. And if you have the lasting effect perk, this lasts for 11 days. So if you're doing a lot of crafting, if you're doing a lot of looting, this is something that you take that, if you don't want to worry about any of those stats, taking care of those, then you just pop this and it's very good. So it's very complex to make, but you can't get these effects anywhere else. So I'm going to put this as S tier. And those are all the items. Looking at how this panned out, it's kind of weird to see that Energizing Potions are in S tier with Aqua, but I still stand by that because Energizing Potions are really good, especially early game when you can craft a lot of them, use them all up, and get a lot of experience from them as well. So yeah. Now remember to subscribe to the channel if you want to see similar videos, because unfortunately that's all we have time for today. If you want to see more videos in the same playlist, then check out the link down below in the description. I'll see you guys in the next one.